Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. This is part 6 of the solo Eidolon hunting guide. And today we are going to talk about the big topic, void damage. Yes, finally. Um, this is unfortunately going to be a long video. I tried to make it shorter, but there is a lot I want to cover in this video and I couldn't really make it sure I could. But I mean, I guess I could have split it up, but I want to keep it in all in one video so you get it all at once. So yeah, let's head right into it. Firstly, like I've said before in a previous video in this video series, the operator is the only thing that is going to allow you to deal the kind of void damage that actually works on the shield. Yeah. As far as the operator goes, you really only have one option to deal a meaningful amount of damage, and that is your amp. That is your operator weapon. It is possible, though, to actually deal the same kind of void damage that can damage the shield in other ways than your amp. You can actually, by, for example, void dashing through the Eidolon, deal damage to it, and I think there are other ways as well. Though I haven't really paid too much attention to it. At least there used to be other ways, such as something that we used to call, what was it called, Void Blast, and similar things, other focus call abilities. But as for this video series, as this is an Eidolon guide, really, I'm not going to talk about that, as you know, the only meaningful amount of damage you're going to deal is with your amp. So, as for the amp, when you finish the quest, you're going to have an amp that is not very good, as you've probably experienced. If you've ever tried to take down an Eidolon with it, it is very weak and you need to get another amp. So, the way you do that is that you head to either or both of the syndicates called the Quills, and I think it's Solaris United. It is the second Fortuna syndicate where you like meet with Little Duck, and yeah, and you can buy blueprints there for parts, and then you build those parts, and then you take all of the parts to either Onko or Little Duck, and you let either one of them assemble it for you, and then you level it up and you guild it. Either one works just fine. The parts you need is a prism, a scaffold, and a brace. And as a matter of fact, you can mix as you wish from both syndicates, works just fine. The amp I have here has a replica prism, which is from the Quills, and then the purple scaffold and the Sodas brace is from the other syndicates. So the prism here will give you your primary fire. As you can see, the stats here for this. Then you have the Probadier, which is the scaffold, which is the secondary fire with the stats here. And then you have the brace, which really just gives a stat bonus. In this case, for the brace, the Sodas brace gives me a critical chance, like extra crit chance on my amp. This is the amp I use. I'm not going to talk too much about it, though there are very good reasons why I use this particular amp. For now, you can just copy it, though I will take and go more into detail about that in another video, as I really easily can talk for 10 to 15 minutes about this amp, because there's a lot to it actually selecting and using a particular amp for the playstyle I'm playing. So yeah, but for now, what I wanted to pay attention to really is the primary fire here, because this is the primary fire is what I'm going to use the replica here for the purpose of this video, to show how the damage actually applies to the shield. Because maybe, as you've seen, if you've tried an amp, you have looked at the stats here, which in this case it says 3000, but in reality, when you actually use it on the shield, you don't deal that amount of damage, you deal severely less, and that is because the Eidolons have an innate damage reduction, which I will show you in a bit. And then I wanted to pay attention to the 2.6 critical multiplier here that the primary fire here has. By the way, about secondary fire, you maybe noticed that, or maybe you didn't, that there are actually no critical stats here. The secondary fire does have its own critical stats, but for some reason it doesn't show that here, which, yeah, is kind of strange. And I've never actually seen these secondary stats for the Propa ever. So that obviously needs to be fixed, but if you want to see that, you'll just have to look somewhere else in the game, or somewhere else outside of the game. Alright, so I'll now go into planes to the Eidolon, and I'll show you the damage numbers. Okay, so we are back here in the planes. So like I said, we are not going to deal the amount of damage as I will show you shortly, and you probably did experience this yourself. Here if I shoot the Eidolon, you see 679 and 174. 679 is the critical damage I'm dealing with this amp, no buffs, and 174 is the amount of damage I deal on a non-critical hit here. So yeah, like I said, you're going to deal significantly less damage because of a damage reduction all of the Eidolons have. This damage reduction is the same for all Eidolons. The only thing that changes is the hitbox, and then the values of the shield, but the actual damage reduction is the same. The other thing is that this damage reduction cannot be changed or altered in any way. It is made by Digital Extremes to be there, so don't try to mess around with it. Even if you find something that works, it's not supposed to work. Removing the armor, for example, will not change the damage reduction for the shield, just so you know before you try. Another thing, there is an aura mod called Shield Disruption, which you may or may not know about. So basically what that does is that it removes the armor, or what am I saying, the shield of all of the enemies by, I think, what is it, 18% or something per aura mod. That actually used to work on the Eidolons, but then they removed it shortly after. That was way back when Eidolons was released. For the reason that, I mean, it wasn't ever intended to be able to use in that way. So yeah, so there's really nothing you are supposed to be able to do about that. So, you know, really what we want to do is to buff our damage instead. And that's the way, and really the only intended way in which we are supposed to be able to increase our damage towards the shields. So, I have a buff here, which I will only use for demonstration purposes. Oh yeah, right, I forgot to mention. So, there's something I wanted to show you about these damage numbers. So you saw there was 174 and 679. Now, why is this interesting or relevant? Well, because if I bring out my trusty calculator here, if I take 679 and I divide it by 174, I can see that the damage increase, or the actual practical critical multiplier for Rat Black, is not 2.6, it is actually 3.9. So in reality, we are actually not doing the amount of damage we would expect. We are doing more damage, proportionally speaking, for the critical hit than the non-critical hit, and it is actually quite a big and significant amount of extra damage on the critical hit. Actually, we are supposed to deal 160% more, but we are dealing, what, 290% more, which is basically double the damage increase on the critical hit. So it's very good to understand that, and that is something that goes for all amps really. Critical hits are somehow dealing more damage than they are supposed to, and this also applies to some buffs, which you will see shortly here. So I have a focus school right now equipped called Unairu. When you unlock a node, you get an ability called Caustic Strike, and it is the second ability here. So when I activate this, I shoot this projectile. Now what this does is that if I shoot it on the Eidolon, it is at least supposed to send out a so-called Unairu Wisp that goes to nearest ally within affinity range and buffs them. Now it doesn't really work if you shoot up here on the Eidolon because it's broken and they still haven't fixed it half a year later. Basically, but or a few months later, but it does work if you shoot here on the ground, or basically on his left foot, and you get the buff there. So if you see in the up there in the corner it says Unairu Wisp, 100%, and it works like a damage buff. So if I shoot here, you see I'm doing more damage, 294 and 1303. The lower value being the non-critical hit, and the higher value being the critical hit. Now, the interesting thing here is that I'm actually not doing the amount of damage I'm supposed to. So, if I take 294, and I divide that by 174, it should be 100% more, but it's actually 69% more damage instead. As for the critical hit, 1303, and then if I divide that by 679, we can see that I actually am doing 92% more damage instead of 100% more damage. So yeah, you're probably also starting to understand why I'm showing you this, because it's really important to understand about the buffs. They are very difficult to predict, as you know, they don't work like you'd assume them to do. There may be a reason for this, and that is that the damage reduction applies differently to different damage values, but I don't really think that's the case, because somehow critical hits are favored, so it doesn't really seem to work like that either. Like, there's no formula you could apply where like this makes sense. So probably what the case is, it's somehow the game is broken. What a surprise. No, but seriously, like, the game is broken in this way. But still, the damage buff still works. Still got a significant amount of extra damage, just not what we would expect. And the thing with all damage buffs is that they work in the order of magnitude. So if something like multiplies your damage, you do quite significantly much more damage in the order of magnitude for that, at least for critical hits. Non-critical hits are somehow not doing as much. As you could see, it was buffed less. So that's something to keep in mind going forward. So yeah. Alright, now I'll go back to Cetus and I'll show you the different kinds of ways in we can actually buff our damage. Okay, so now let's have a look at the focus schools. There are 5 different focus schools, as you should probably know. 3 of them offer nothing particular in terms of being able to increase your actual void damage. These two are the only ones which actually offer something unique for that, and that is Unairu and Madurai. And I'm going to start by going over Unairu just to cover it, but in reality Madurai is the focus school you actually want to go for using for solo gameplay, for solo Eidolons. So like I showed you, Unairu Wisp here, 100% chance to summon an Unairu Wisp per enemy hit by a Caustic Strike. The Wisp will seek out the nearest ally within affinity range, increasing operator damage by 100% for 20 seconds. Or yeah, at least in theory 100%, like I showed you. Not quite, but yeah, that's kind of how the game is. But at least in theory, or estimated that kind of amount. Then it has Last Gasp of Vengeance here, which this is nothing I recommend you use, and I'm going to explain why here and how it works. So Last Gasp in itself doesn't give you any more damage, but Vengeance here builds off of Last Gasp. So yeah, so that's why I'm going over this. Last Gasp. Revive your Warframe by transferring to operator and killing enemies before the revive meter drains in 15 seconds. Each kill refills revive meter by 30%. So basically this is a mechanic that, you know, if you die, or rather if you get downed and you get into the state where you can revive, or someone else can revive you, you can press 5 and you can like transfer to your operator, and even though your Warframe is down, you can still like go around your operator and shoot and do things like normal with your operator. You can just not use your Warframe for this little short duration, and the meaning of it is that you're supposed to revive yourself by killing enemies. Now, the thing with this though is that Vengeance is a thing. What Vengeance does is that during this thing called Last Gasp, the operator damage is increased by 100% plus an additional 25% per second. Of course, these values are estimated again, but you get the idea. So, in other words, in this kind of weird mechanic, you actually get more damage, operator damage, and this works for the void damage which you can deal to the shield. So in other words, you can actually use this mechanic in a very weird way, where you don't use it what it's supposed to, what it's like made for, but you actually use it to deal more damage towards the Eidolon shields instead. And this is a good amount of extra damage. That's 100% plus an additional 25 per second, which can add up quite a bit. Like if you stay there 5-10 seconds, you're going to deal 200%, 300% extra damage, right? So, you know, it's a big damage difference. But yeah, it's very quirky to use, and therefore I don't really suggest that you use this. It's more of an advanced thing. I've myself been playing around with it, but the thing is, like I said, you can't really use a Warframe while you're in this state, and therefore, and also requires a bit of timing and so, and therefore, you really have to like use your actual amp to take out the Zenobia as well, which is just very complicated and really is not for this video. So if I'm not going to talk about it, it's not that you can't use it. If you want to play around with it, feel free. But yeah, once you do this, you have to like kill enemies, or the only thing you can come by really in Eidolons is like Wombalist, because Grenier are too far away, or at least usually. So yeah, just explaining that. So I'm not really going to talk about it too much, but I just wanted to mention it. And it's also important to understand about these, that these are also something called waybounds. If you don't know what that is, here is a list for all the other waybounds. So how waybounds work is you can upgrade them, and when you've upgraded them, you can actually unbound them from your specific focus school. This is not possible for all like nodes, but it's possible for this type, which here are the other unbounds for that focus school. So what this means is that all focus schools actually will be able to use these abilities. So if I go to Madurai here, you can see here that I have Lost Gospel and Vengeance here, and I can use this with Madurai. So, when I get down, I can actually use this Lost Gospel and Vengeance mechanism. So what that means is that it's not something that's special to Nairo, and all focus schools can use this. So in reality, the only thing Nairo actually has going for it is that is something you can only use with Nairo is Nairo Wisp, which the Madurai can offer more in terms of damage, and therefore Madurai really is the better option, at least for solo. Nairo is more something you want to use if you take out the Zenobias and you buff a teammate instead. So, firstly, Madurai has Phoenix, Talons, or Talons. I don't know exactly how you pronounce that. Anyway, physical damage and operator damage is increased by 30%. So, this basically just increases your operator damage by, well, 30%, at least in theory, right? And it works like a passive, so as long as you have this focus school selected, you will get this damage bonus. Then we have power transfer, so 100% amp critical damage for 20% for 20 seconds on switching to operator, 50% casting speed on switching to Warframe. So an extra 100% critical damage. And like I said, you activate it when you press 5, when you're in your Warframe, and you go to your operator, and you have it for 20 seconds. So this is great. This basically doubles your critical damage, again in theory, but I mean basically. So it's very strong and really like gives critical hits another huge advantage over non-critical hits. And yeah, then it also has the other like what is it? Yeah, it also gives you extra casting speed when you switch back to Warframe, but that has nothing to do with void damage. But I just wanted to mention that. Then we have Void Strike. Now, if you didn't used to do Eidolons before, the experiment patches, basically how Void Strike used to work is that you stayed in Void mode and you built up stacks. You built up a total of 8 stacks to begin with, and you could use them, and you stay in Void mode to kind of like increase them from 0, and when you used all of them, you had to start over. Nowadays, on the other hand, it's an ability, so when you activate it, which it becomes like your first operator ability, so you press 1 right in your operator and you activate it, and when you do, it consumes all of your energy, which by the way is not your amp energy, it is your operator energy, in case you didn't know that those are 2 different energy bars, to increase damage for 8 seconds. And you deal an additional 10% damage for every percentage of energy consumed. So what that means is that if you have a full energy bar, when you activate it, you get an additional of 1000% extra damage. And this is additive. So, and also it works, also it has a 40-second cooldown. So this is additive to this, so when you actually have Void Strike active, this is basically useless, but this is still important for when you don't have Void Strike. So the thing with Void Strike here is that you see that it only lasts for 8 seconds. This means it is only good for one shield, and you won't be able to use it for the next shield. And then it has a whopping 40-second cooldown, which how Void Strike used to work is that you could use it all the time. Now you cannot use Void Strike all the time. As a matter of fact, if you're playing at the top speed, you can only use this every third, at maximum every like second shield. Like every third second, yeah, basically, because like one cycle of the animation is, what is it, like 70.1 seconds. So yeah, so the reality with this is it is great when you have it, and especially for the first shield for every Eidolon, as it is twice as big, and they use it for one shield, actually 2 more for the Gauntless and Hydralist. But the thing is, you cannot use it for every shield, at least not in solo. If you're playing a squad, you can of course take turns and shoot the shield, but as for solo, you cannot do that since you're only on in squad, right? So in solo, you really have to make use of the other buffs here, as well as another buff here, which I will get to into a second, as they will become vital to actually being able to deal a meaningful amount of damage then. So, Contamination Wave, and this is on your second ability, Operator ability. So you activate it, and when you do, you emit a Void Wave that lasting 2 seconds that drenches enemies with Void Contamination. So basically you shoot out this wave and they get affected by this Void Contamination, which is some Zeriman thing, whatever it's supposed to be, right? And they get this kind of glow, and you can see it kind of visually, right? Making them 50% more vulnerable to operator damage for 20 seconds. Now, the thing with this and how it works is that doesn't give you 50% more damage. Instead, it takes damage you're already dealing and making the enemy that is affected by it receive 50% more damage, basically. So the way it works is that it's multiplicative to this, multiplicative to this, and to everything else, literally. So that's why it's actually not a bad ability. Instead, it's a very good ability for that reason, and very powerful. Now, the thing with it, which is kind of problematic, is that unless they changed it recently, which honestly I haven't really played the game that much recently, so I actually don't know. But at least how it has been is that it hasn't been refreshable. And you might say, oh, but that is not such a big problem. Well, the thing is if you spam it, it looks like it lasts longer, right? Because it looks like it is refreshed, because the Eidolon still has glowed with this kind of contamination, even though the actual buff isn't like refreshed. And even more problematic, especially if you're playing in a squad, which that isn't what this video is about, but I want to cover it anyway. The reality is that, you know, if someone else shoots and you shoot, yeah, you have literally no idea when it is active and when it isn't. It is complete gamble, and so you just have to spam it and hope that it's active when you actually are supposed to shoot, right? Because it looks like it is active, but in reality you're not actually getting the bonus if it actually isn't, which has its own timer, which is different from the actual visual effect. So yeah, so it's very important that you time this and that you don't just spam it, so you know when it's active and when it isn't, and yeah, that you also time it so it is active when you need it, and that you have the ability to refresh it when you need it, right? So yeah, just mentioning that and explaining that about this. Then we have Distilled Contamination. Now, this unfortunately is not a very usable ability when it comes to taking down Eidolons, unfortunately, and I'll explain why. So, killing an enemy affected by Void Contamination Wave makes all affected enemies 50% more vulnerable, while also making the effect last 10 seconds longer, maximum 2 stacks. So, to explain this, if you affect a bunch of enemies with this Void Contamination, and you kill 2 of them, or you kill enemies, some of the enemies, the other ones will be 50% more vulnerable, so you will have an additional 50% per enemy to this, up to 102 stacks, so that would be a total of 100% extra, which would total, together with Void Contamination, to 150% extra vulnerable, right? Which practically would mean that if you kill 2 enemies, you would deal a total of 150% extra damage then, which would total 2.5 times your original damage, which again stacks multiplicatively with everything else, right? So this would be absolutely fantastic, and it also increases the duration of it. The problem is that it actually requires you to kill enemies to be able to do this. And as you've uh, if you have played Eidolons, you know that there really aren't many like Grineer enemies or whatever to kill around the Eidolons because they don't spawn there. And even if they did, they would die like instantly. So that's just how the game is. And then you may say Vombalists. So the thing with Vombalists is that at least when I play, and when you play at like the possible fastest speed, or less than 10 seconds from that, or something like that, like less than 10-20 seconds from the maximum theoretical possible speed, assuming you don't glitch the game, they really don't spawn, right? Or they at least don't spawn reliably, right? So this is really nothing you can rely on, unfortunately, even though it worked on Wobbleists. Now, I haven't actually tried, but I don't think it does. But even though it did, it still wouldn't be reliable to actually use when you play the game. Again, unfortunately, but that's how it is. But yeah, if you want to play around with it, feel free. But in reality, the only time where this can actually be used is elsewhere in the game. But I don't really understand why anyone would want to use it in the rest of the game. But yeah, just saying. Alright, now we will head into arcanes. So there are now a billion different things in the game which has arcanes. One of them is your amp now. So I also think I should just mention this about Magus Melt. Maybe you've seen me use this, and the reason I do is because it does increase your damage, but it increases it with heat. And heat is a physical damage type and does not work on the Eidolon shield. Therefore, this does nothing towards the Eidolon shield. But the reason I've used it is to actually take out Synovias with my amp. So that's why I've used it. But yeah, it does nothing towards the shield, and therefore I will not talk about that in another video. Like, I will not talk about it in this video, right? I will do that potentially in another one. But yeah, you have arcanes for your amp, and that's what we're going to discuss now. So as you can see here, first of all, I have 2 arcanes and not 1. Originally, for custom amps, you only have 1 arcane slot. But you can get another one for a particular amp, or for any custom amp really. You just need an arcane adapter, amp arcane adapter, which you can get from the Zariman Syndicate. You put it on your amp, and that will allow the amp to have another arcane slot. So, now then, let's discuss the different arcanes, which in reality there are 5 that actually work and do something at all, which is the 5 arcanes I have here. As for the other arcanes, the reason I don't have them is that they offer nothing in terms of being able to deal more void damage. But I'll go over them and explain why they are not useful and why you shouldn't use them. Virtuous Drawn. So on hit, converts 98% void damage to viral damage. So the problem with this one is that it converts your void damage to a physical damage type, which, like I said, physical damage types don't work on the shield, and therefore this is useless. Not only is it useless, but it actually hurts our damage, and it removes literally 98% of our damage. So this is something we would never want to use. But even though it didn't convert our damage to viral damage, if it added viral damage instead, even then would it be useless for us, as it would take away the slot from something which can in fact increase our void damage instead. So therefore you would never want to use this ever. So yeah, just explaining that about this. Yeah. Alright, so Virtuous Tempo. On kill, 60% chance for plus 60 fire rate for 8 seconds. So there are a few problems with this one besides its usability. So that's the fact that it requires a kill. So as I've explained to you, there really aren't any enemies around, at least not when you're playing at somewhat close to the theoretical maximum, right? Like we're playing at the pace I'm playing at, and even if you're playing at a like casual pace, there still aren't any Grineer or whatever around. It may be so that you actually can get the buff, assuming you play really slowly and there happen to be a billion, Wombolists around. But even then, there are like other options which can actually increase your damage instead. And the thing is, you can take out the shield within 0.1 milliseconds, less than 0.1 milliseconds, without any extra fire rate whatsoever. That is for another video, but yeah, just explaining that. So this really doesn't have a place even when you two-shot the shield. On hit, converts 98% void damage to electricity damage. So this one does the same as Virtuous Drawn here. So this is something we don't want to use. Same for this one, but it's puncture damage instead. Virtuous Null. So on kill, plus 20% amp energy regeneration for 4 seconds. I guess this is more kind of a roast of all of the like bad arcanes here, but yeah, I'm just going to do it anyway. On kill, so firstly, like I've explained, kills aren't easy to come by, or at least not at that rate, and it only gives plus 20 amp energy regeneration for 4 seconds. So the thing is, even though we could use it, we don't need the extra energy, because the reality is we can get extra energy from the focus school abilities. For Madurai, and actually they are way bound, so they can work for any focus school. And we already have more than enough energy we need, so there's literally no reason why we would need this, as you know, we also get extra regeneration from another focus school ability. So this is completely useless, complete waste of a slot, as there are better options which can actually increase our damage instead. Virtuous Ghost. So on headshot, 40% chance for plus 60% status chance for 12 seconds. So the thing with this one is that status chance actually doesn't work on the Eidolon shields at all. So it's kind of weird why this arcane honestly exists. If it's like, you know, seriously, I really don't understand why it's a thing. Because it does nothing towards the shield. And the other thing is with so basically how the status effects of void damage works is that there is this kind of sphere that it like makes whatever, and at the point where you actually hit the Eidolon, or like whatever you hit with it, right, it's like a middle of it, and then, you know, if you shoot bullets into that sphere, it will just suck them towards that middle point, right? So the thing is, if you shoot right next to Zenobia, it can even take the bullets away from the Zenobia, so it could actually grief and like sabotage for you the void status effect. So if I could choose, I would purposefully have, you know, a negative status chance. Okay, no, but like, you know, if I could have zero status effect on my amp, I would choose to have that over any status effect whatsoever. So for that reason, this is a big no. Virtuous Forge, so this one does the same as the other ones, but it converts it to heat, so it's not a good option. Eternal Logistics, so on Void Sling, plus 72% amp ammo efficiency for 8 seconds. So, like I've explained to you, we don't need extra energy. The fact of the matter is, for any individual shield, we will need a total maximum of 2 shots ever if we play it right. Otherwise, you are not playing. Otherwise, you are not maximizing your damage. Simply is what I'm trying to say. So we don't need more ammo efficiency for our amp. We have more than plenty of energy already. As there are better options, we can increase our damage. This is not a good option, simply. So that leaves us with these 5 arcanes, which have one thing in common, and that is that all of them can actually increase our void damage. Now, as for these arcanes, there are better ones and there are worse ones, and I'll go over that now. So, Virtuous Shadow. This one, on headshot, 40% chance for plus 60% critical chance for 12 seconds. This one is not bad. It has critical chance, and as I've shown you, critical hits are somehow favored by the game for the reasons that buffs work better, and also there are buffs that work only for critical hits. Therefore, this one is definitely not a bad arcane, and this is actually the arcane we used to use. This is the old crit chance arcane, and it is not a bad arcane. The only problem is Digital Extremes, not with the Zeriman patch, but after the Zeriman patch, when they realized their whole focus change was an absolute catastrophe, and yes, that is a fact, not an opinion, they released this monster, Eternal Onslaught. So what this is it's literally, um, you know, the buff dude who threw, Virtual Shadow out of the window. No, but seriously, this is a monster of an arcane. On energy depleted, when you get rid of all of your operator energy, which is kind of weird, but anyway, whatever. You get a whopping 180 critical chance for 8 seconds. I don't know what they were smoking when they did this, but this is absolutely nuts. This is a lot of crit chance. So obviously, you can see that if you got to choose between one of these, you would choose this one every single time, and that makes it so that the only time you would use this is in your second slot, not in your first slot. And as for this one, this is the arcane. If you can only choose one, this is the one you want to use. Though of course you want to have two, but I'm just saying, just because of how important critical hits are. Now for this one, there are situations where you might want to use this, though I would not necessarily suggest it. The reason why you would want to use this is to increase your critical chance even more, to either reach guaranteed crits, like yellow crits for a particular amp, or to go for orange crits. Now, as far as trying to reach critical hits, yellow crits, guaranteed yellow crits by using both, this isn't needed for any of the amp parts, which are actually good. So I wouldn't suggest using for that reason. As for reaching orange crits, the thing is, you can't reach guaranteed orange crits. So funny story, it actually looked like when they announced these two arcanes here, which is also a new one, it looked like we were going to be able to combine Virtual Shadow and Eternal Onslaught to get a guaranteed orange crits with, I think it was Rat Black. So everyone was kind of going insane over this, but then they suddenly decided to change it, so they reduced it, so we couldn't anymore. And I will think it has to do with the fact that they realized that they made a mistake, that we were going to be able to hit guaranteed orange crits. But as for now, they're the only good option where you would want to use both is for something such as Cantic. Cantic is a prism which kind of shoots a burst of 3 shots, and the fact that it shoots 3 shots like a burst makes it so that it isn't as RNG dependent, and also it has 97% critical chance, which makes it very consistent. So you're in reality 99% of the time you're going to get or 99% of the time, but very, very reliably you're going to get at least 2 orange crits, or so you could use it with that if you want. That it's also quite easy to activate Shadow with that, but I wouldn't. But as for me and the amp I use, this isn't really a good option. So instead, what I use is Eternal Eradicate here, which is also one of the newer arcanes which was released at the same time. On operator ability, that is when you use an operator ability for Mandoroid, that is either Void Strike or what is it called? Contamination Wave. So when you activate them, you have a guaranteed proc to get plus 60% damage for amps for 8 seconds. Now, the way this one works is that it's additive to Phoenix Talons, and Void Strike. So, while you have Void Strike, this really doesn't give you any benefit at all. But that isn't the reason why you want to use it, because the reason we want to use it is because when you don't have Void Strike, which is really when it matters, because when you have Void Strike, you really don't need it anyway. Since you do so much damage anyway. But yeah, it works great when you don't have Void Strike. It really gives you a significant amount of extra damage. Therefore, I highly suggest that you use this one. Now, as for these two other ones, I will just cover them a little bit. These two ones are also old arcanes, as old as this one right here. So, by power creep, of course, these ones are not going to be as good, as I'll show you. So, this one on status of Virtuous Fury, which is actually a sad one at this point, because it's completely just overrun by power creep. On status effect, it has only 20% chance to activate, which, by the way, getting a status effect isn't that easy to come by anyway. But even when you actually do get status effect, it only has 20% chance to activate. And when it actually does activate, it only gives you half of the effect, that is plus 30% instead of plus 60%. And on top of that, it only lasts 4 seconds. yeah, it's kind of a sad story, but that's how it is. So you know, since you only have 2 arcane slots, you never want to use this. You'd always want to use this one instead. So never use this one. And then as for Virtual Strike, which honestly isn't necessarily bad arcane, the only problem is its activation and its duration. So on critical hit, which definitely isn't difficult to come by, um, it only has a 20% chance to activate though, which is its problem. And then when it finally does activate, it only lasts for 4 seconds. So it's kind of difficult to use, and therefore I don't suggest that you use it. As for the amount of increase in damage, it's actually not that bad. Plus 80% critical damage. However, how this one works is it stacks additively to power transfer. So, you know, since we're already using Madarite, the effective increase in damage we're going to get is not 80% more, but it's more like 40% more, right? You know, at least the theoretical numbers. So, for that reason, you know, in reality, you'd want to use Eternal Eradicate, just because it's much easier to use. Now, the time when this really shines and is better than, you know, Eternal Eradicate here is when you use Void Strike. However, when you use Void Strike, you really don't need this since you're doing so much damage anyway. So in reality, the only time when we need this is when we don't have Void Strike, and then this one is probably even slightly better at that. So that's why I suggest you go with this one instead of this one right here. And then you of course want to use Eternal Onslaught. Alright. Now we only have 2 things left. And that is, firstly, it is Volt. So, as you've seen in my videos, I've been using Volt probably. And that is because Volt has something unique to offer that no other Warframe has. And that is his Volt Shield. So the thing with this Volt Shield is that when you shoot through it, you get damage buffs on your shots. So it does 2 things. The first thing it does is that it adds electricity damage. So it's 50% extra electricity damage to your shots per shield you shoot through. And this electricity cannot be combined with anything else. The problem with this one, if you want to deal void damage, is that it does not offer any benefit to this. As it is the physical damage type, and as I've explained, physical damage types don't work on the Eidolon shield. However, it actually has another thing that it can do, and that is that it can double, or well, at least in theory, like double critical damage. Or like estimated double. So the way this one works is that it works multiplicatively with power transfer, which means that this one, together with power transfer, practically, or at least if you're right, multiplies your damage by 4 times. So that, together with the fact that critical hits are already favored and get more damage from damage buffs than non-critical hits, and the fact that the critical multiplier is broken or whatever, so they already do more damage, just makes it so that critical hits are overwhelmingly strong compared to non-critical hits. So just explaining that. But here's the thing which is good to note about it, and that is that the critical buff, it doesn't matter how many shields you stack, you will only get it once. So if you have 4 volts in your squad and you stack, what is that, 24 shields, you will only get double your crit damage once. However, the electricity damage works like this, that you can get it for each shield. So if you have 24 shields, that would be what, 1200% extra electricity damage, right? As far as the electricity damage goes, it's really only useful if you want to like take out this Novia with your amp, really. It doesn't, like I explained, it doesn't add and offer any benefit, which by the way people used to do. So they used to stack a bunch of shields and take out this Novia with their amp before the environment changes. Just a little note, just explaining that. Alright. Yeah, then we have one more thing now, and that is something called Damage Bless. When you reach Mastering 30, you get the ability to go into relays and use something called the Bless Fountain. The Bless Fountain can give someone a so-called Bless, which is basically a type of stats or bonus of some sort for 3 hours. This ranges from useless things such as a little bit of extra health and shield to more useful things such as damage and Bless. And what that is that it increases your damage by 25%. Now, it doesn't seem like a big increase or whatever, or meaningful, and, you know, in normal missions, it's basically irrelevant, since you have things which can 10x or 100x your damage, right? But for Eidolons, it's a big deal, because there are a few things which can actually increase our damage towards the shields, and this is one of them. So it is 25%, or that's what it is, at least in theory, but from my testing it is more like 13%. If I remember correctly, either way it is somewhere in between 10 and 20%. Now the way this one works is that it's not additive to things such as phonics, talons, and the arcane or whatever. It's actually multiplicatively compared to everything else, so it actually isn't bad. So if you can get it, I recommend that you use it. It's especially helpful for the Hydrolist. However, if you don't, it works quite. You can still do pretty solid runs. You just need to sweat a bit more, right? And some tip for using it real quickly. So what people usually do is all of them stack together in the Orcus relay, and people take turns in blessing for each night, like 20 minutes before. So if you want to be part of that, you can. There really aren't as many people as there used to be, since a bunch of people quit with the Cyberben changes. They really used to grind this. So just a tip, so it's a bit easy for you to be part of that, and you don't contribute, or you can just be that person that just comes there and leeches every time. Anyway, it really fits a bunch of people, so it's fine. All right, so now then I thought I would head into the plains and show you a bit of the damage numbers and also the comparison between critical hits and non-critical hits. All right, so we are here. Just quickly going over power transfer. Like I said, you only press E here, right? Go into operator and you have it up in the accordingly 100%. Eternal Eradicate, you just activate like an ability like Void Wave here, or Contamination Wave once, right? For the crit chance arcane, you spam a bit and waste all your energy like that. And then for the Volt Shield, you just place it and make sure you shoot through it. And as for Contamination Wave, of course you want to activate on there. So alright, so let's try to test out our damage a little bit here. So this is the critical damage. 7,000, that was a red-orange crit right there, which actually happens quite often, since with this setup, Raplak actually has like 50% chance to orange crit, which, you do orange crits very often with this. So that is nothing to rely on, especially if you really become sweaty, but yeah, there's something that still helps. So just wanted to show you what the damage is like when you don't crit. So there you saw 396 compared to 7,001. 7,100. So you really see the difference there, and that was with the exact same buff setup, right? Besides the critical chance. So if I take 7,100 and divide it by like, what was it, 400, you see that I do, well, this was estimations. In reality, it's more like 18 times the damage comparing critical hits, non-critical hits, and all buffs. So there you get a really good demonstration of why the way you're going to do really meaningful damage is with your amp. Is critical hits, really. By the way, as you saw there, I dealt 6,000 damage, and that's because for last hit you just deal the remaining little bit of damage that is left. Even though you deal more damage, it will only show the amount of damage that the shield actually takes for your damage value. Just explaining that in case you didn't know. Okay, so let's take out the Synovia here. Yeah, I haven't played for a long time, I'm sorry. And just for a little bit of demonstration, Propa is obviously very strong. I will get into that in another video, but I mean, I will one-shot the shield here, right? Just wanted to show that. But yeah, the important thing to note here is the comparison with the damage, right? So in the beginning, when I didn't have any buffs, I dealt with 174 with my non-critical hits, and was it 600 with my critical hits. So obviously it's a big difference. By the way, if I use power voice track here, I deal like I one-shot the shield easily here with Raplak guaranteed. So yeah, you see the damage comparison, how the damage buffs and everything work together. So hopefully you have understood everything and you're now a pro at this, right? I will go over the particular amp I use and why. Otherwise, it has more to it than just being, going for a one-shot, one-kill, right? There is something specific, especially with Propa, that is special to Propa. But yeah, that's for a different video. But yeah. But otherwise, like for the normal shields, this proper is basically designed to deal as much damage per shot as possible. So just to understand that. Alright, so yeah. Good luck and have fun. To you know, play around with a little bit with this. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. But yeah. Otherwise, just ask questions. Again, I'm happy to answer, and I may make a little bit of a follow-up to answer something if I did miss something. Alright, see you in the next video. Peace.